As I walked up to the sculpture, on a brisk fall day, with the autumn leaves rustling with each footstep, I was intrigued by the balance of circularity and linearity. This sculpture is perfectly nestled between two mature trees at their peak foliage. The colorful canopy of these trees is draped over the sculpture and acts as its protector. As I began to further explore the sculpture and all of its elements, I was immediately brought back to my high school physics classroom. This sculpture reminded me of the many physics labs that demonstrated gravity, acceleration, speed, and many other concepts that I never quite fully grasped. Physics, as a field of study, is very complex as it aims to understand how the universe behaves, and the idea of complexity can be translated into this sculpture. This sculpture seems to represent a moment in time as three of the circular objects appear to be rolling down the long, slanted iron rod, with a fourth circular object below the iron rod. The bottom circle seems to be wedged into the ground to hold the iron rod in place. Based on the angle of the iron rod to the ground, which I would roughly estimate to be at about 45 degrees, if the iron circles were released, they would roll down quite quickly, and my guess would be that they would pick up speed along the way. This idea also connects to the title of this sculpture, Rolling Down, which cannot be more fitting. While this sculpture is static in nature, the title offers insight as to how the sculpture would behave if it were in motion. Additionally, the title of the sculpture ties to the physics concepts that struck me when I saw the sculpture for the first time. This snapshot in time also reminds me of wind chimes swaying in the wind that were freezed, representative of a thinner sphere located at the top of the iron rod with a chain and two discs suspended from it. This wind chime-esque object seems to balance out the heavy circular objects on the other end of the iron rod. If this sculpture were to be unpaused and allowed for the gravitational forces to take over, the iron rod would shift and become parallel to the ground. The disc with the chains would weigh down the upper end of the iron rod in a similar fashion to how a seesaw moves. While this sculpture appears unbalanced to the naked eye, achieving balance is not as far-fetched once the shapes and asymmetry are internalized. The contrast of circularity and linearity eloquently balance each other out as the harsh lines and angles are complemented with soft, rounded edges that are much friendlier on the eye. The mix of lines and circles help the viewer admire the sculpture and to not have too light or heavy of an experience. A little bit of imagination and thoughtfulness is required in order to reach visual equilibrium and understand how balance is present. This sculpture was constructed by an artist named Leon Gerst. He did not follow the traditional path to become an artist, as he was a successful businessman for the majority of his career, and then he became an active sculptor in his later years. In his active sculpting years, he produced more than 100 large works of art that are displayed in private collections and in exhibitions at universities throughout the United States. Strips of steel and iron, the staple for his artwork, are always reconditioned or junk steel. Gerst prides himself on how he would go to industrial scrapyards to scrounge for materials. He once said, "I have fun using old stuff and making something new." He is noted for bold and soaring uses of metal, many 20 feet in height, and this sculpture certainly checks those boxes. While this sculpture does not help me solve any complex physics problems, it serves as a symbol of balance and peace and makes the impossible seem more approachable and achievable.